Welcome to Around the Blockchain. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Perfect. All right, Carolyn, welcome. Would you mind just introducing yourself to the audience for me?
Yes, fantastic. Hello, my name is Caroline Bowler. I am CEO of BTC Markets based here in Melbourne.
Lovely. And so how did you get into the crypto space? Obviously, you're CEO of quite a large exchange, Australia's largest digital exchange. So how did you actually get into crypto itself?
So my whole background is probably it's a story like many others in that I came from traditional finance. I started off working for a private client stockbroker in Dublin. I'm from Ireland. Back in the days where it was still stock-based certificates. So my first project was the dematerialization of stock certificates, and I think I've probably been reinventing that wheel the whole way through my career. And then moved to a US investment bank in Dublin and cut my teeth on a lot of the operational side. So I really understand kind of how the traditional market space really works, particularly with regards to equities. And moved to Singapore in 2008 with the investment bank and spent kind of the GFC there working with hedge funds. And so I have been regulated by the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and so I have a really deep kind of traditional finance background. But I made the leap, and I think it was 2014, because the mists of time, it all kind of blurs out, and went back to university in Singapore and did another degree in communications. And on the back of that, set up Asia's first fintech and blockchain focused strategy and communications agency. And it was a fantastic time to do it in 2015. By the time I started the business, I think it was, particularly in Singapore, who have long positioned themselves as being a bit of a front runner when it comes to embracing fintech and embracing blockchain. But it was really, really clear what the opportunity was, particularly coming from traditional finance. It was so obvious where this was going to go. And I was just, made that leap back in 2015. BTC Markets were actually one of my clients because I had opened up offices here in Melbourne. They're one of my clients. And so when I sold my business and moved to Australia, and subsequent to that, then I got asked would I like to have a chat about coming on board at BTC. And I joined here end of January last year, and 6 weeks later we went into lockdown. So it's been really fun, but like you say, I mean, this is a dream job, I think, for anybody. Just looking after such a fantastic company and in an area that I'm so passionate about. So yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've come from a traditional finance background. How do you sort of think those experiences that you learned from back in the traditional finance world have sort of shaped you and made you successful in the crypto sort of industry?
Yeah, I think, certainly working in traditional finance and then starting my own business certainly really hones down a work ethic, particularly when you've got a team that are relying on you to do your job and do your job properly, or else they don't get paid. So that certainly sharpens the focus. So probably that sense of work ethic came through. Also, the mundaneness of being process driven and understanding the importance of process. But more importantly than anything, I think it's to do with being steeped in a compliance culture. So really understanding, as I say, I was regulated out of Singapore. So really understanding what compliance can do for financial services, and likewise then what we can bring into crypto. And it's not to protect us as an exchange per se, it's to protect the investor. And as I kind of mentioned, I worked with hedge funds throughout the GFC and could see and feel quite directly the impact of certain trading behaviors, even by sophisticated investors, the risk that they wear and the impact that some of that risk can take when it doesn't go according to plan. So I think in a lot of senses, that has shaped my point of view when it comes to certain risky type products, which isn't to say it's a blanket no or anything like that. It's just more about making sure that there is additional rigor in place and not just offering up, say, for example, extended margin trading to retail clients. And I don't think that that can necessarily lead to good outcomes for everybody when the market turns, because inevitably it does. So it's probably more about additional rigor around that. Not to rule it out, it's just being very more moderate, perhaps.
Yeah. And look, have you always had an interest in, I guess, in finance itself?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so this is possibly more telling about me than anything else. But when I was younger, I mean, I'm talking very young, and this is going to age me here. Dynasty rather, Dallas and Dynasty both used to be on the weekends. And to me, the most glamorous person in the world was Joan Collins' character in Dynasty. And I just wanted to be her. When I was growing up. I'm talking very small now, and I don't know how I kind of drew the connection between what she was doing and finance, but I'm basically living out my Joan Collins dreams ever since then by coming into finance and just enjoying it ever since.
Yeah, that's awesome. What a great story. What a great like motivator to get into finance. So
exactly, Joan Collins.
So obviously you're the current CEO of BTC Markets, which is Australia's largest digital exchange. How has that experience been? You mentioned that you sort of jumped on board 6 weeks before sort of COVID hit last year. I can imagine it's been a bit of a testing sort of time. But how has the experience been overall?
Overall, it's been absolutely fantastic. It has been it's been a privilege. I think it's probably the best way to put it. And so much of it feels so special to be at the cutting edge of a new asset entirely, to see where this technology is taking us. When I was in university in Ireland, I was doing a Bachelor of Arts in European Studies, so studying politics and law and languages. And my housemate and wider friends were all doing computer science and applied math. So that's who I ended up hanging around with. And we must have been our first year, on one Sunday afternoon in particular, we broke into the postgraduate computer labs and saw what was at the time the most cutting edge of technology, which is where they had a camera on the top of one computer and the image was being seen on the screen at the other end of the lab. And that was just mind blowing for its time. This was the late 90s. And to be able to sit now, and part of my job is just to constantly be at that cutting edge. That's a dream. But what also for us as a team really gives us the feel goods, if you like, is we get responses in from clients, people who've been around since maybe 2017 or even before then, who have been investing in digital assets and cryptocurrencies specifically since that time and through our platform. And they're then cashing out because they have now saved enough for a deposit, or they're going on a dream holiday, or they're getting married, or whatever life goals they have now achieved through their investment with our platform. And as a team, we get that high with them because we're going to absolutely fantastic that we've been able to, in a small way, help facilitate somebody get to where they want to go with their life. I think that's amazing. And there's not many people in finance, in traditional finance anyway, who get to directly feel that impact from clients. And so we're always really, really pleased when that happens and cheering them on from the sidelines.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an awesome story. I can imagine you would get some really great feedback from customers and clients and stuff like that. Would you say that's one of your biggest accomplishments, is hearing sort of stories like that, or is there something else that you would?
I don't think that I've made my biggest accomplishment yet. I think I'm still possibly halfway through. When I first came in and kind of looked at the lie of the land in terms of where we were positioned and where the market was going, and knew that the pace of change was just going at such a pelt, and knew that we had to reconfigure within the business how we were structured and what we were about. I said at the time it was going to be a 2-year project. We are into that 2-year project. And I think probably ask me in January of next year what I've accomplished, and I'll probably feel more. I mean, that's for me as an individual. As a team here at BTC Markets, the team have been phenomenal, and working all the way through COVID from respective kitchen tables and garages and all kinds of setups, and to pull together as a team and do what they've done. It's just been phenomenal. And then to come out the other side of it into the market pump, and just to stay nimble and flexible. And gosh, these guys work so hard. And I suppose it's probably the hardest story to tell because, for an outside from a client, they don't get to see all the work that goes on inside the exchange. And it's immense, and we're working on really large projects, but oftentimes that impact isn't felt for some time. And so it looks as though, gosh, what are they doing at BTC Markets? But in reality, gosh, working away. And hopefully more, well, not hopefully, I know that more of this is going to start rolling out over the rest of this quarter and into the next Q3 of this year. So soon we'll have a grand unveiling of all the work that we've been doing.
Is there anything that you could allude to, or are you going to just sort of have to leave it at that at the moment?
Well, I don't want to, I've been wrapped in the knuckles before for doing little teasers, so I won't do that again. Learn that lesson well the first time. But I think what we've done is we've listened to the feedback from our clients who are looking at things like mobile apps. They want better payment forms. They want an increased number of new coin listings and so forth. And we've certainly looked at how we can best not just facilitate it for now, but how we can best for the future, kind of be as proactive as we can with that. And so hopefully we'll have some good announcements coming out soon. But that's probably as near as and that's not a teaser, so don't start giving out. That's just me giving a general response to the question.
No worries. Thank you for that. Look, you said that you've probably not actually achieved your greatest accomplishment yet, which is awesome. Mm-hmm. Great attitude to have. What would you say your biggest challenge has sort of been?
So COVID was challenging in that I didn't know the team didn't know me before we all went to our kitchen tables. And so that's been challenging. So and what I'm bringing in is change to this business, and change is hard for humans. Change is hard for everybody. And so that's been challenging to keep the team with me as I bring them on this, another adventure in crypto. But the destination's worth it. But the challenge that's definitely been is managing that change, and because you care about the team and you want them to succeed as much as anything. So yeah, that's probably been the biggest challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Change is always very difficult for, like you just said, any human being to sort of cope with. So glad you guys were able to get through it. Look, obviously, crypto's been bombarded with a rush of institutional investment from 2020 and obviously through the early stages of this year. We've had Michael Saylor from MicroStrategy, Elon from Tesla has obviously announced that they've purchased some Bitcoin, recently sold some as well. Have you guys noticed a big wave of sort of institutional investors coming through onto your client books as well?
So what we've seen has been an increase in SMSF. We've seen an increase in corporate. We haven't necessarily seen that increase coming through in institutional. And by institutional, I mean financial institutions or like large pension funds, that kind of thing. And I think partially that's to do with on and off ramps to come in and out of Aussie dollar through in the sense that if you are trying to take positions of the size that those guys are trying to take positions in, any of the exchanges that we have locally probably would find their book blow out if they took it all in one go. So I imagine that's part of it, is like waiting for the market here locally in Australia to mature enough that we can start taking in trades of those sizes, as you would expect to see on a large exchange like the ASX, for example. That said, looking at the pace of growth coming out of, say, the Coinbases of this world, I think it's just a matter of time before that starts to come through. What's really, I think, also significant is the potential improvement in the regulatory environment here in Australia. I think that, so was that for Blockchain Week, I was up in Sydney on a panel at the ASX with Senator Bragg, who is the chair of the Senate Committee for Australia as a Technology and Financial Centre. And also, as the Deputy CEO of the ASX, we also had MasterCard and PayPal on this panel. And one of the points that one of the announcements that the Senator made was a commitment to providing within the next 6 months appropriate regulatory surety for digital assets. So obviously cryptocurrency as one of those digital assets. And giving that regulatory surety to us is more about giving it to the investor, so that they will know what it is they're getting into, they know what safeguards are in place. And because as it stands at the moment, it's very thin on the ground, probably the best way to describe it. But I think, from a survey that we did ourselves of investors, that lack of regulatory surety is the number one inhibitor for investment. And so I think once that shoe drops, if you like, we can expect to see more of that coming in it certainly will keep us in line with kind of international players out of Hong Kong, Singapore, the European Union, the US, the UK, Japan. The list is endless. And so it's great to see that Australia will get that hopefully before the end of the year, at the very least, a framework that can then be discussed and put forward for review and submission then to law.
Absolutely. Look, is that regulation, is that probably one of the hardest sort of things at the moment to kind of navigate? Because like you just said, they're so sort of thin on the ground with stuff like that. Has that kind of been a bit of a challenge for you guys?
Yeah, and I think it's probably been a challenge for every kind of half decent exchange in this country that are trying to do the right thing for their investor as much as it is for their own business model. I mean, there's lots of things I'd love to do more of that I'm not able to do because of that lack of regulatory clarity. So there's offerings I'd love to give to clients that I can't until I get appropriate regulation and then licensing or whatever route they go down. And as I say, that kind of harks back to that time I spent being regulated myself and being compliant, that I can't kind of undo all of that training. I've been inculcated into that way of thinking, and to be fair, so is the exchange. It has always been that way. So for us, yeah, we're really excited to see where this is going to take us, and just think it's going to absolutely turbocharge the industry here and the investment here, but also the opportunity, and really bring increased sophistication to the product offering that's available to the Australian investor, whether it's at the retail level or SMSF, corporate. The list is endless. So it's exciting. 2022 is going to be very exciting, as much as 21 has been so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you mentioned an influx of, I guess, self-managed super fund investors and also corporate investors. Do you mind me asking what industries these corporate investors are sort of coming from?
They're a mixed bag, but what I will say they have in common is that invariably they are entrepreneur founded. Obviously an entrepreneur starts every business, but my point being is that even if they are multi-generational, the ethos behind the businesses that we've seen coming in are ones that are set up with a more of a, I don't want to say non-corporate attitude, but more of a vigorous, right, let's just get the job done kind of an approach, which would be, if you have an entrepreneur at your helm, that's exactly the approach that you're going to get. And so it feels as though their appetite to explore alternatives is probably greater than those who are kind of, I suppose, more of that institution, if you get the difference. So that's something what we've seen from corporate. So they come from a variety of sectors. They can be, paint supplies. They could be, any kind of different manufacturing or services sector. There's a wide variety, but inevitably what they have in common is that there is an entrepreneurial vision and zeal probably still within those businesses. So yeah, for us that's great. We're excited to work with them and kind of talk to them about the different opportunities that's available.
Absolutely, that's awesome to hear that people are sort of starting to try and, I guess, diversify their business assets, I guess, that they own. So that's really cool to sort of hear. Look, you mentioned that you sit on the board of Blockchain Australia as well. Would you mind sort of talking to me a little bit about that, what that sort of role encompasses, and I guess what you do with them?
Sure. So I joined, I think it was earlier this year. My first year of board membership, and myself and Adrian from Independent Reserve in Sydney represent the digital currency exchange kind of sector, because obviously blockchain in Australia, the industry itself is very broad, but that's the piece that we look after. And kind of work there entails obviously frequent contact, frequent meetings and so forth as a board, but it's also about advocacy for the industry, both within our own roles as CEOs, but also then as to try and take on the challenges of the industry with things like regulation, and being part of those discussions would be part of that. And certainly the kind of conversations that we have at board level, because as industry, not just ours, but the blockchain adjacent industries here in Australia are still in their growing out stage. And so we try to help and shape the conversation nationally as much as possible around that, and stick a flag in the ground for the DCEs, because I think too that when it comes to this kind of technology, people are comfortable talking about it in the context of, say, manufacturing or logistics, supply chain, manufacturing, or meat supply. Those are conceptually ideas that people can get their heads around. And that blockchain using in cryptocurrency, people still have some struggles with getting their head conceptually around it. So sometimes we've got to bang the drum the loudest and to get our point across. And I also think too that conceptually, not necessarily in Australia, but for the industry more broadly, there has been a perception that it started out from perhaps a more murky past, and some of that still lingers. So our job then too, as part of BA, is about shifting that representation and expectation of what it is, and instead they meet a middle-aged woman running a DCE, and I think it's probably not what they quite expected to see. Particularly when he keeps going on about compliance and regulation so much. So all here to buck the trend.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you were also recently part of Blockchain Week in Sydney and Melbourne. How was that event?
Right.
Obviously, I understand that was a pretty well-run event, and everyone that I've spoken to anyway had really good things to say. What was sort of like some major takeaways from that?
Oh gosh, major takeaways are you should always wear flat shoes at conferences, no matter whether they're virtual, hybrid, or otherwise. That's probably the main takeaway. It was the energy. I came away feeling more bullish, more optimistic, more pumped for blockchain and obviously digital assets in Australia more than I've ever been before. I think that the quality of speakers and conversations that were being had publicly and also kind of in the side rooms, the kind of networking conversations that were being had, we have moved so far. And in fact, one conversation that I was there on I think it was the Tuesday in Sydney, the panel were being asked about use cases for blockchain. And the point then, the discussion then moved on to, gosh, do we even still need to talk about use cases for blockchain? Has it moved on enough now? Are people educated enough now that we don't need to keep talking about this is what it does? That there is enough of an understanding there. And I think that, there is still some distance to go, but like just the fact that the conversation is moving on, even within those discussions, is fantastic and really shows the maturing of where it's going. And so, yeah, as I say, really positive, really bullish. I mean, the fact that you could host an event of that nature by the ASX with, politicians being represented and major international companies talking about their blockchain projects, and particularly when it comes to finance. And I mean, that shows how far we've come. Really, really shows how far we've come. So it was so, as I say, overall positive and just, exhausting and exhilarating and brilliant. And, and then even, like the overseas speakers that would all dial in to join in the conversations and share their perspectives. And, it was excellent. So all that content is available on video through Blockchain Australia. If anyone wants to go in and have a look through some of those panels, they're available to review.
That's awesome. Glad that the event was obviously well run, and it's good to hear that people are sort of educating themselves. I guess they know what the use cases and stuff are. Speaking of which, obviously within the crypto industry, we've had the ICO boom in 2017. Most recently, we've probably had a lot of talk about the NFT sort of, I guess, niche within the market. Where do you sort of personally see things going, this year and I guess beyond?
This year, I think for me, the next piece will be DeFi. I know DeFi is, considered to be a success story that's already kind of underway. DeFi has only started. It's only the very tip of the iceberg with DeFi. And that to me is going to be my personal opinion. Do not trade on this advice. My personal opinion is that it's probably going to be bigger than the exchanges.
Is there anything in particular?
Bigger than trading.
Sorry, is there anything in particular in the DeFi space that you're sort of looking at that sort of sparks your interest?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots there's lots of projects I'm looking at, and actually just this week I was looking through kind of what MStable are doing, another Aussie DeFi project, and that sparked some interest in me. I'm kind of good to have a rummage through. I think for us, or for me personally, like even looking at it from where it was last year, it was DeFi was still too raw. It was still trying to cut its teeth. It hasn't had its big shakeout yet. It hasn't, which every industry sector does. It's not because it's only DeFi, it's because every industry sector has to do it as part of its maturing. And not just about consolidation, but just so that we see, okay, well, who are the front runners? Where are the best projects? What are we looking at? But for me, yeah, DeFi is just going to be the most significant. So NFTs are fantastic. And I think, there's been a lot of kind of hype and nonsense said about them. But, taking a snippet of time and making a judgment on its future based on one little, a couple of months, a few weeks of activity is no way to decide any kind of business plan or whether something is viable or otherwise. So, would it be a rip-roaring success the way the most positive are saying? Possibly not. Will it be a crashing defeat? Probably not either. It'll be somewhere in there, because that's, water finds its level, as they say. But I'm still excited about the fact that we're seeing these increasing number of kind of offshoots, and that are going to grow and be sustained and be part of the blockchain economy to come. So I mean, I'm bullish in general. Obviously, I kind of want to be the job that I'm in, but these things, yeah, I mean, to be fair, most of my day in the morning, I listen to 2 podcasts. I get into work, I try and read some of the main crypto media, have a look at some of the traditionals, just to try and basically stay afloat of all of the exciting changes that are happening. And there is no way that I'm across, even more than 10% of what's being out there, because there's so much that's happening. Which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Compare that to, I don't know, other traditional businesses. Oh, no thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it really difficult to even just, like you just said, consume about 10% of what's out there. It's quite difficult, even though, we both work in the industry. It's, very, very difficult to stay across everything, because it's moving at such an extraordinary pace that I think it would probably be impossible for anyone to stay on top of, to be honest with you.
I've heard that a few times, and I take some comfort from that.
yeah, exactly. Look, within DeFi, obviously you guys run like an exchange where you abide by a whole bunch of regulations, KYC, AML, all that sort of stuff. We have, I guess, maybe I could probably describe it as maybe like an anonymous exchange, sort of like Pancake Swap. Where do you sort of see the middle ground between those two sort of extremes? You've got one that's sort of basically almost anonymous completely, and then one that's sort of, quite well regulated, which I think is great. Where do you sort of see things going in that sort of respect?
I saw that Wyoming has put forward some legislation around DAOs to create them as LLCs out of Wyoming. I think that's very curious. And I have to wrap my head around that, to be honest, too, of like, how do you, because if they don't actually have a presence there, because how could you do your DAO? How does that work? Which isn't to say that it doesn't function. It's just I haven't quite managed to grasp how they've conceptually done it, because smarter minds than me have tackled this problem. And I can see why that kind of setup works. I can see why, as in a DAO, like why that anonymity is so valuable. And I suppose it kind of goes back to that point about it's still very much in its nascency. It still needs to not consolidate, but still needs to find its shape, because of the only kind of thing I have concern around is investor protection in something like that. When, how comfortable are they explaining enough to people that this is where your money is going to go or not go, or those kind of concerns, which isn't to cast aspersions. It's simply a question of how do they manage that? The investors coming in, how do they feel about that? And I can see why they appeal, but what about the downside? And I really, as I say, have kind of got to wrap my head around the whole thing. But that's because I think it's got legs. it's not because I think it's going to evaporate. It's because I think it's got something to it. And that's why I need to kind of really understand, particularly in context then, like that way if you're doing financial products, but you don't have a home base anywhere. So what protections are there and how does that work? And I know you're going to say smart contracts, but what about manipulation and so all those different kind of, again, probably need to speak to somebody smarter than me about DeFi to explain all of that. But I'm really obviously intrigued by it and can't wait to see how it's all going to evolve.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think the regulators are going to have some fun with it too.
Yeah, I believe so as well. I've spoken to one regulator before, Loretta Joseph. She works in the regulatory sort of space, I guess. She had some really interesting points to sort of discuss, and I think that space is going to be an interesting one to sort of watch, like how everything sort of pans out. I think you're right. Like, there's pros and cons to both having an exchange like BTC Markets where it does obviously abide by regulation and there are rules and stuff in place to, cover investors. And then, on the complete opposite side to that, you've got Pancake Swap or, something like that, Sushi Swap, which is completely anonymous, invest at your own risk. It's like almost the completely opposite sort of side of things. So it's going to be interesting to sort of see what happens, I guess, within that sort of space. With BTC,
I must go back and have a look at what Loretta had to say on it.
Yeah, she was very, very interesting. Really great guest. I would highly recommend looking at that episode. She was very, very insightful. She's quite a well-known person within the industry, so it was good to get her on and just sort of pick her brain about a few things. What's next for, I guess, BTC Markets? If you can discuss anything that's sort of either in the pipeline or that you kind of have just recently, brought out or released.
So, well, actually, we just recently brought out staking for Algorand, which awesome. In and of itself was really interesting. The issue for a lot of this stuff is the regulatory grey area. And the reason why we've gone with staking with Algorand in particular is because of the way that the nature of that staking, because obviously staking can differ from the protocol can differ, the mechanism can differ with each of them. And that's why we went with Algorand originally to start. And I think it's really, it's a little movement forward, offering something like staking. And it's kind of breaking a bit of new ground in terms of product offering for people and just starts to slowly build out where we need to take this into and what else is out there. For us this year, so the non-sexy stuff has been all the infrastructure builds that we've been doing, which probably clients won't really get to see and experience until probably maybe next quarter or into the second half of next year. But they will be a bedrock for expansion thereafter, or just a bedrock for the whole business that we can really push the growth through. And after that, I would see, I've got a backlog of new tokens that I want to get listed, that because the team are working on this infrastructure piece, I can't get them over the line. So, the speed that I want to, but I have a list of tokens I want us to have a look at properly. And that will be one of the main, from a retail point of view, that would be the main driver. Then equally, we need to, start talking to our institutional base here in Australia and prepare them for what is to come. And kind of with that, we already received ISO certification for information security management systems. I always get that acronym mixed up, ISMS. So we received that in December of last year, but in this year now we're going to go for what's called SOC reporting, which is actually it's an international standard, but it comes out of the US, and that will take us to the next level in terms of the structures and rigors we have around financial reporting, around security management, around operational management, all the stuff that's not very sexy, not very cool or exciting, but is absolutely key if you are serious about engaging at institutional level. You need to have these processes and cultural mindsets in place within your business. And again, probably coming from the banking background, I understand exactly what it is, where we need to go with those pieces. So while we'll have more to offer for retail very soon, these are kind of the larger projects I'm looking at. That and DeFi. so in between, when I have moments and when I have pockets of time on the internet looking up, what's interesting, particularly here in Australia, I really want to do more with some of the really cool Aussie projects in this space, because I think we need to support each other in this ecosystem. And if we're not going to back an Aussie project, who will, right? It needs to be it needs to kind of support your own to a certain extent. Just, rising tide lifts all boats.
Absolutely. Look, you mentioned a few really interesting points there. Staking, I find that really interesting. I was explaining that to my 72-year-old dad the other day. Kind of had to sort of go around the route of, it's sort of similar to a term deposit, but not the same thing, and what have you. You obviously earn a yield on it. I found that conversation quite interesting. I find a lot of people talking about staking. You mentioned you're going to obviously be having some conversations and stuff with institutions in the not too distant future. How have they been? Have they been, receptive to having these conversations? What's the sort of feedback like from them?
Yeah, I think it's foolish to think that they're not already looking. This assumption that they're all sitting on silence and twiddling their thumbs. Are they heck? I mean, it's the same with what Jamie Dimon had said about how he would fire any traders that was doing crypto. And at the same time, JP Morgan had a desk that was trading crypto. And the individual traders were doing it too. And research that we've done has shown that I think a quarter of our client base earn over $100,000 a year. So within that would be a section that are in finance. And we know that to be the case, because we can see, from the job descriptions that people give us, that they're coming in from traditional markets. So if they're doing it on an individual personal capacity, likewise, they're influencing discussions that are happening around their boardroom tables and so on. And I think, for their reasons, they have to be quiet about it, and for their reasons, they have to be low key about it. But I think it's quite disparaging to assume that they're not having a look. So yeah, I think, as I say, 2022 probably will be the more significant year for institutional in Australia.
Absolutely. I think it's pretty ignorant to think that, large financial institutions worldwide haven't looked at this sort of stuff. I would even suspect maybe a couple of central banks here and there may have also possibly made some moves behind closed doors as well. So I just think it's probably a little bit ignorant to think that, like, oh, these guys are so late to the party, or whatever the narrative sort of is within the community. I just don't think that's true. So look, we've been going for close to 40 minutes, Carolyn. Do you have any sort of closing thoughts or anything else that you wanted to chat about?
No, not really. I mean, other than, it's been lovely to talk to you, and it's lovely to have these time outs to kind of even just reflect myself on all the really fun things that we do here at BTC Markets. There's a lot more to come from us, and I think a lot more to come across the industry as a whole. But yeah, so no, it's been great. It's been really nice. Thank you very much.
No, awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.